Today we are going to discuss purchase order processing and receiving. The purchase order process in the Advantage system provides you with the ability to create a purchase order to go ahead and print to send to a vendor. Then, as you receive items in from that particular vendor on that purchase order, you can allocate or show that you've received those before you actually get the invoice from the vendor. So we actually have a separation of duties. We have the process of receiving the equipment in, which will go ahead and increase our inventory, and then we have the process of actually creating the invoice. This video is only going to cover the purchase order process through receiving. So we're going to go ahead and create a purchase order, and then we'll go ahead and receive the items in through that. The purchase order invoicing is going to be covered in a separate video, so be sure to watch that. Okay, the first step, let's go out to our purchase menu, and then let's go to the order processing folder, and let's select from here orders. So from purchase orders, this will bring us out to the last purchase order we worked on. What we're going to do is we're going to create a brand new order. We'll come back to this order and process this in a minute. We're going to do a couple of different orders so I can show you some different functionality in the system. First of all, let's just go ahead and hit F3 to create a brand new purchase order. The process is to hit F3 and then enter, and what enter does for you is it generates the next purchase order number in succession for you from your number series for purchase order. So here we've got PO 00022, and then of course it creates our posting date, order date, and document date as 12/1/04, which happens to be the work date we're working in the system. Okay, now we'll review over each one of these fields, or most of the fields on this. What we're going to do is we're going to specify to buy from a particular vendor. So let's go into our buy from vendor number field, click on the lookup arrow, and then what we're going to do is we're going to choose to buy from the Nissan Forklift Corporation. So we'll choose Nissan and say OK, and then once we press enter off of that field, you'll notice that it brings in some information from the vendor card. So it brought in our buy from contact number, which came from there, the vendor name, address, city, state, and zip, and some other information on the other tabs that we'll get to in a minute. Now, for this particular order, we're just going to tab or enter through and get to the various fields here. And you'll notice that it brings up our comment sheet once we get to that comment button. Once we got to this comment pencil, we can go ahead and enter in any comments that we wish about this particular purchase order, and we'll just go ahead and skip that particular step here. So I'll escape out of that one, and you'll note here that we have the three fields: posting date, order date, and document date. Now these three fields, what it means is the posting date is the date through which anything we process on this particular order will post to our general ledger. The order date is the date in which we processed this purchase order, the day we actually created it. And then the document date is the date that's going to appear on all of the documents that get created from this purchase order upon posting it, such as a posted purchase receipt, as well as a posted purchase invoice. Right now, we're going to leave all these dates the same. We'll come back and we'll talk about those in a minute. Now, if you had a vendor order number, you could certainly enter that in here. We don't have an order number or a shipment number as of yet, or even an invoice number, okay, because we're just creating this purchase order from scratch. Now, we can choose to order from a specific order address from this vendor. If we click on the lookup arrow, it'll give us a listing of all the order addresses for this vendor. We're just going to order from the main office in Marengo, Illinois. If you had a purchaser code so for a purchaser who processes this, so if you're keeping track of your purchasers, commissions, and so forth, you can click on the lookup arrow and choose the purchaser code from the salesperson purchasers table. In this sample company, we just have salespeople defined in this database. So we're going to skip over that field. For the responsibility center, if you're using responsibility centers, you could pick the responsibility center that this is going to apply to. So we're going to say that we're going to buy for our Hartford office in this particular case. By entering in that responsibility center, it'll default information such as the location code that we're going to have this vendor ship the product to, as well as any default dimensions that were assigned to that responsibility center. So I'm going to enter through. Brings me to the status field, and you'll notice that the status is currently set to open. When I enter again, it brings me to the invoicing tab. Here I've got a pay to vendor, which happens to be the same vendor. If this vendor card had a different pay to vendor, that would default in here. So all of that information came in. Here the department code, which happens to be a dimension established in this sample company. We've got department and project code as our global dimensions, happen to default in from the responsibility center. So it brought in our Hartford department. It brought in our payment terms code that vendor has assigned to us. So here we've got the due date of this particular invoice that will get generated from this is 12/31, and that is driven by our document date from our general tab. If we change that to be the date that the vendor's invoice actually is, this due date will go ahead and change. And we can take a look at that a little bit in the purchase order invoicing videos. We'll take a look at that. Okay, payment discount percentage. If you had a payment discount percentage applied from your payment terms code, let's say you had terms of 2%, 10, net 30, it would bring in that payment discount percentage here and calculate out the payment discount date through which we could take that percentage discount. Okay, it would also default in any information about tax liability information from the vendor card. On the shipping tab, it defaulted in here the location code of Hartford from that responsibility center, and it brought in their ship to addresses to where they're going to be shipping it to. Now, if you happen to have gotten from your vendor a promised receipt date for the inventory items, or you know a date that you're expecting to receive those inventory items, you're going to enter those dates in here. Now, these dates will default onto the lines. There are some columns here that are hidden currently, but they will default onto the lines. And what happens is other areas of the system look to that expected receipt date field to determine, when you're trying to plan for when things are supposed to be received. So various reports will look to that field to grab that information. Now, if you don't enter in any dates here, the system will simply use from the general tab, it'll go out and it'll use the order date that we had entered in there. For foreign trade and e-commerce and procurement, those are all advanced topics that we don't cover in this video training series, so we're going to skip over those three tabs. Now, back to the general tab. What we need to do now is start filling out our purchase order lines as to what we are going to be buying from this vendor. So let's go down to the first line and let's go to the type field. You'll notice we have some choices here. We could pick blank, GL account, item, resource, fixed asset, or charge item. For this sample that we're creating here, this sample order, we're going to choose an item. We're going to choose to purchase a specific item. We're going to go to the number field and click on the lookup arrow, and we're going to pick to buy two different items. First off, we're going to buy a stud from this vendor. I'm going to minimize my navigation pane so you can see this purchase order in greater detail. And of course it brings in my description of a stud for that. I've got a location code of Hartford, and here now I can set the quantity of what it is that I'm purchasing. So let's say I'm buying 5 studs from this particular vendor. When I choose a quantity of 5, it calculates my line amount excluding tax to be $123.50, which is the 5 times our direct unit cost. And this unit cost of $24.70 came directly from the item card. If I go out to the item card, and take a look at the invoicing tab, here you'll notice the last direct cost was $24.70. That is going to be the unit cost that gets defaulted into this line because we don't have any special pricing set up for this vendor. Now, you'll also notice that we have 4 fields over to the right here. Quantity to receive, quantity received, quantity to invoice, and quantity invoiced. What these fields are is they tell the system when I go ahead and when I post a receipt for this, let's say, I'm telling the system that the quantity that I want the system to receive in is whatever I specify in this field. So here it automatically defaults in to be the full quantity, but there could be a situation whereby you only receive a partial quantity, and we'll talk about that when we actually process the receipt of this. We'll go through an example of that. Now, on a purchase order, you have the ability to receive as well as invoice, get the invoice and post that invoice in the system for this purchase order all at once. For our example, we're just going to be receiving them in. But if you did go ahead and invoice it, you could tell the system, here's the quantity I want to invoice at this time. Now, after you post a receipt or invoicing, it'll tell you here how many you have actually received, what the quantity was that was received, and the quantity that had been invoiced for that. What we're going to do is we're going to move down to the next open line, and we're going to pick another item to go ahead and purchase. If we click on our lookup arrow, and I'm going to go to the end here, I'm going to choose the Nissan Heavyweight F05 series. Now this happens to be, if we take a look at the item card for this happens to be the costing method is specific, and we're keeping track of this. It's serialized item. Okay, so this is a serialized item, so we need to specify what the serial number is for that particular item. Let's close out of this, and we're going to choose the F05 series. And here now you'll notice it also brought in a second line of information or a description for this. So it shows our Nissan Heavyweight F05 series as our description, but it also comes in as a pneumatic forklift. It's a diesel forklift. That came in, if I click on the lookup arrow and go to the item button and choose extended text, you'll notice here that we've entered in extended text for this. If you've purchased the extended text granule, you can utilize this to put in an unlimited amount of text to show up on various sales documents, purchase documents, service, and rental documents. For more information on that, be sure to review our video on extended text. Let's close out of that. Just wanted to show you the reason why that got pulled in. And now here we're going to show that we're purchasing a quantity of one of these pneumatic forklifts. So we'll put a quantity of 1 in there, and of course now at default our line amount excluding tax to be that quantity of 1 times the 75.99.99, and we have a quantity to receive and quantity to invoice set to 1. So at this point now we have filled out all the information that we wanted to fill out for this purchase order. So the next process in this is to go ahead and send this purchase order off to your vendor. And you can do that by going to the print button to print this particular purchase order, and then we could either fax it or send it off to the vendor this way. So here we could choose to print a specific number of documents, we could choose to print the company address, we could even choose to archive the document if we wanted to by checking that box. Let's go ahead and just preview this on screen so you can see what the purchase order looks like. So this is our purchase order for our company Cronus Construction in Hartford. It shows the Nissan Forklift Corporation as to who we're purchasing from, telling them to ship it to our 40 Darling Drive address. Shows our purchase order number, PO number 22. It shows here that we are going to, the terms are net 30. It shows the phone number, or our phone number, so the vendor can get in contact with us, and what their vendor ID number is. It also shows here what items we're purchasing from that particular vendor and what the description of each one of those items is. It shows our unit price and total price, and then if there was any invoice discounts or tax applied, it would show that here. So our total amount is $77.2349. So we go ahead and print off this purchase order, send it to the vendor. Okay, so now at this stage, the thing we would do is we would wait. We would get approval from the vendor. If they give us an order number, we can certainly fill it in here. But what we need to do is, next thing is process our purchase receipts for this. Okay, so let's say that we're going to push ahead a couple of days. I'm going to go to my work date. I'm going to go to Tools Work Date, and I'm going to say that it is 12/3 of 04. Okay, so now we've changed our work date to 12/3 of 04. And what we're saying now is that we are going to process the receipt of some of these items. So what we do is we're going to change our posting date because we want to post this receipt as of the day that we're working, that we actually get it in. So I'm going to change the posting date to 12/3 of 04, and you'll notice that the document date changed as well here. The posting date and document date will stay in sync. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to get that receipt in from the warehouse, and we show that we received from this particular vendor. Let's say we received only a quantity of 3 of these studs. They were back ordered on those particular studs, but we also did receive in that Nissan Heavyweight F05 series. Now, for these lines, okay, for instance, for the Nissan Heavyweight series, since that is a serialized item, we do need to tell the system what the serial number is of that particular item when we get it in. So now that we've received it into our warehouse, we look at the serial number and we can input that information onto this line. So what we do is we go onto the first line, go to the line button, and choose item tracking lines. And what this does is it allows us to go in and specify the serial number to apply for this particular item that we've received. So the serial number for this is F058992. So this is the serial number of the piece of equipment that we're receiving in, and we're saying that we're going to receive a quantity of 1. So this is how we process the receipt for the item tracked items. So in this case, or rather serialized tracked items. So we're keeping track of that serial number here. Once we've entered that serial number in, we can close out of this window, and now that has captured that serial number such that when we go ahead and post the receipt of this, it's going to post that receipt with that serial number of this particular item to that item card. We can also say here that like I said before, we have a quantity of 5 that we ordered from them, but we actually only received in a quantity of 3, let's say. So we change our quantity to receive to be 3. What that means is that we're just telling the system that when we process the receipt of this, it's going to show our quantity to receive as only 3. So once I enter off that field, you'll notice it changed my quantity to invoice to 3 as well. When we go ahead and post this receipt, watch what happens to the quantity to receive field and quantity received field. Now, of course, if you had a shipment document from the vendor, you can certainly capture that shipment number if you want, just by entering in that information on the shipment number field. And what we could do now is go ahead and process this receipt. We do that by going to the posting button and choosing post. And right from here, we have a choice to receive, invoice, or do both, receive and invoice. So what this means is that if I've only got the receipt of the items in, but I haven't gotten the invoice from the vendor yet, I just want to process the receipt by choosing receive. If I've already received all the items in, I finally get the invoice, I could choose just to invoice it. Or if I receive the items in at the same time that I get the invoice, I could choose to receive an invoice at the same time. In this particular case, we're going to choose to just receive it. We'll go ahead and say OK to this. And what will happen is the system will process the receipt of the 3 studs and the 1 Nissan Heavyweight F05 series pneumatic forklift. So now here, when we take a look at this purchase order, now you'll notice that the quantity to receive has been brought down to 2 because it's saying, you know what, we've already received a quantity of 3, we've ordered 5 of them, and so therefore our quantity to receive yet still is 2. So that automatically calculates that for you. And it brought my quantity to invoice back to 5 because we've received in 3, we're still expecting 2, but we haven't actually invoiced anything yet. On the second line, our quantity to receive, of course, is 0 because there was only 1 to receive, and now it shows, the system shows that we've already received that 1. So let's take a look at each one of these items to show the receipts that got created. Let's go out to our history folder from our purchase folder, and we'll choose posted receipts. What I'm going to do is go to the last receipt in the list because we happen to process that, and you'll notice here it's purchase receipt number 20 from Nissan Forklift Corporation. Posting date was 12/3 and the document date was 12/3. It captured our order number, so it shows purchase order number 22, the vendor's shipment number, which we entered in, and all the information from the header of the order. And it also shows here that we've received in a quantity of 3 for this item and a quantity of 1 for the second item. We could print this if we want. Go to the Options tab, print our company address if we wish, preview it on screen, or print it to our default printer. And here now you'll notice that it shows our purchase receipt. It shows our purchase receipt number, the date, and so forth here. Shows the quantity that we've received, shows the quantity that were ordered, and then it shows, of course, those that are back ordered, if any. So now we could take this purchase receipt and staple it to the vendor shipment document if we wish, and keep that on file. Okay, so that is our posted receipt. Now, by receiving these in, let's go out to the item, each one of these items, and take a look at what happened. If I go to the item number field, click on the lookup arrow, it'll bring me to my item list, focused on that stud in this particular case. And I can go to the item button, choose entries, and let's take a look at the ledger entries that were created. Here, the vendor ledger entries, on 12/3, I had that purchase receipt for a quantity of 3. So it shows here, right in the item ledger entries, that we do have that quantity to turn around and sell. One of the advantages of the system of being able to receive before actually getting the invoice from the vendor is that we could receive the quantity in, turn around and sell it before we actually even get the invoice from the vendor. So I'll close out of that, and then we'll go down to the second one. Click on the lookup arrow. It brings us to our item list focused on Nissan Heavyweight F05 series. And I can go to the item entries and choose ledger entries first to show you that on 12/3 we had this purchase receipt number 20 for a quantity of 1. And if I wanted to show the item tracking entries for this, I can go to item entries and then choose item tracking entries. And here it will show us the serial number and so forth of the item that we received. So here it shows a purchase receipt number 20, shows here's the serial number we entered, F058992 in Hartford for that quantity of 1. Okay, so the receiving of this will actually receive the items in to your stock so you can turn around and start selling them immediately. Now, the next thing I want to do is go ahead and push ahead 2 more days, let's say, that we receive the final amount of those. So I go to my tools and I'm going to go to work date and just change it to 12/05. And what we'll do is we'll go to the posting date now and we'll say that it is now 12/05, and we change that posting date and document date to 12/5. And in this particular case, we're saying that we're going to receive in the remaining quantity of 2. So now I can go to the posting button, go to post, and show that we've received in this quantity of 2 for this. So here we've got quantity to receive of 2. We can choose to just receive this because we're going to cover invoicing in a separate document. I'm sorry, separate video. So when we press receive, what will happen is it creates a second receipt for the quantity of 2. So now you'll notice here it shows our quantity to receive is set to 5, and now we can go ahead and invoice for this full thing. Once we get the invoice from the vendor, we can compare it to our document, make sure everything is right, and then go ahead and post that invoice. If I go back out to my history folder again and choose posted receipts and go to the last receipt in the list, it will show me that quantity of 2 for this one that I had received. So it shows that quantity of 2. Obviously we have no quantity set for the Nissan Heavyweight series, but this does show that that quantity of 2 created that the positive adjustment to our inventory for that quantity. So if I go to the item entries and look at ledger entries, now you'll notice that here we've got our purchase receipt number 21 on 12/5 for that quantity of 2. Okay, so that's the receiving process for our inventory items. What I want to do for you now is let's go back here and let's move back a purchase order. I had already created a purchase order in the system so we could begin to work with it, which consisted of fixed assets. So here, to spare you filling out all that information again, I already filled out the header information. I picked Deere and Company to purchase from in a responsibility center of Hartford. You'll notice here the invoicing tab brought that information in the same. We're shipping to our Hartford location just like we had done before. I had also filled out the 3 different assets that we had purchased, or we want to purchase from them. So here, if I click on the lookup arrow, you'll notice on this fixed asset card for this asset, there is currently no book value assigned for this asset. So here, on rental asset number 81, we have no book value assigned. Therefore, if we click on the drill down arrow, there are no ledger entries for it. We're going to come back and we're going to actually show you the ledger entries that get created upon actually receiving these. Now, for this, let's just say that it happened to be on 12/5 that we received in the fixed assets. All 3 of them came in at once, and we wanted to show that in the system. So when we look at this particular order, we've got our fixed asset numbers here. We've got our quantity to receive all set to 1 and quantity to invoice set to 1 because we haven't done anything on this order yet. Now, on this, let's say we want to capture the vendor shipment number. Okay, so they gave us our shipment number. We wanted to put that information in there to post to the purchase receipt. And at this point, we can just go ahead and receive these. Now, go to the posting button and we choose post. And in this particular case, we're going to choose to receive only. Looks like I did forget one step. I did say that it was 12/5, so I do want to go ahead and change the posting date to 12/5 and the document date to 12/5. So now we go down to our posting button and choose post, and we'll go ahead and choose receive at this point. What's going to happen is we're going to receive a quantity of 1 for each one of these fixed assets, and what it will do is it will create a $0 acquisition entry on the fixed asset card. The reason for this is if this is a rental asset, one of the rules in Rental Advantage is that you must have an acquisition entry posted to a fixed asset before you can turn around and start renting that. So what we have done is we've created the ability in the system to create a $0 acquisition entry if you're not posting the invoice at the same time as the receipt. So if you're just processing the receipt, it'll create that $0 acquisition entry, which doesn't affect any value for that fixed asset at all because it is $0. But it does provide you with the ability to go ahead and start renting that equipment right away. So let's go ahead and say OK to this. We'll choose receive. We'll say OK. It'll process the receipt of all 3 of those. And now you'll notice our quantity to receive got brought down to 0. And the quantity received now reads 1 for each one of these. And let's take a look at each one of these asset cards now. If I go to the fixed asset card, here you'll notice still the book value is set to 0 for this. If I click on that drill down arrow, you'll notice here that the amount, it's got a acquisition entry here, so there's an acquisition cost from this invoice, which shows the total amount set to 0. Okay, so the document type is set to invoice, but there is no document number because we haven't actually created an invoice in this system. So it shows our fixed asset number, the depreciation book code, and now we can turn around and start renting this equipment to start earning revenue on it right away without having to worry about getting that invoice from the vendor. One of the things that you should be wary about is that when you are copying fixed assets, and be sure to watch our video on how to copy fixed assets as we discuss this in greater detail there, but the depreciation starting date here, you'll note reads as 7/22/04. In this particular case, since we received it on 12/5/04, we want to enter in that 12/5/04 with the number of depreciation years, so that when we start calculating depreciation as of the day that we receive it, as we really should start calculating it as of that day, we want to make sure that it pulls in from the correct date. So I just wanted to change that depreciation starting date to be the date of first acquisition for this asset. And you'll do that for each one of the assets. If I go to the next one, here you'll notice I got the same information, brought in a $0 acquisition entry for us. And what we can do is we can change this to be our work date with 5 years. And then we can move to the last asset which we received, which was number 83, which had that same $0 acquisition entry applied to it. And then we're going to go ahead and change our depreciation start date to be the day that we actually receive this in. So that is how you process purchase receipts for your fixed assets as well. So we have two separate purchase orders that we looked at. One of was for receiving in 3 different fixed assets or rental assets that we're going to turn around and rent and earn revenue on. And one was for 2 different types of items. This is a quantity tracked item, which happens to be a stud, and we did serialized tracked item as well, which was a Nissan Heavyweight F05 series pneumatic forklift. So now that we have these items in stock, we can turn around and sell them, turn around and rent them right away, and once we get the invoices in, this will actually close out the purchase order. So be sure to watch our video on purchase order invoicing to learn more information about how to create the invoices in the system so we can turn around and pay our vendors. So we compare the invoice that we get from the vendor to what we have in our purchase order system here, make any changes as necessary, and also maybe add any freight charges if there were any, because a typical scenario would be that the person who's actually creating the purchase order may not know what those freight charges would be, so you might want to add those after the fact. This concludes a video on purchase order processing and receiving.